Without another word, Ethan picked up his worn toolbox and walked toward the disabled prototype SUV. The laughter behind him faded into the background. Years of hardship had taught him that arguing with people who underestimated him only wasted time. Results spoke louder than pride. He opened the hood carefully. The engine bay looked unlike anything found in ordinary vehicles. Instead of a traditional gasoline engine, it housed a complex hybrid electric powertrain packed with sensors, cooling lines, high-voltage cables, and an advanced control module. Every component was meticulously arranged, clearly designed by some of the brightest automotive engineers in the country. One of Victoria's senior engineers folded his arms and watched with amusement. "He won't even know where to start," he whispered to another engineer. Ethan ignored the comments. His eyes moved slowly across the system. He wasn't just looking at parts, he was reading a story. Every scratch, every loose connector, every warning light revealed a clue. Years before becoming a mechanic, he had specialized in industrial automation and engine diagnostics. Those skills had never left him. He reached into the cabin and pressed the start button. Nothing. The dashboard flashed several warning symbols before going completely dark. Ethan murmured. Instead of checking the battery first like most mechanics would, he crouched beside the rear wheel and listened carefully near the cooling pump housing. Tick. 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 An unusually slow mechanical pulse echoed through the silence. "There you are," he whispered. One of the engineers frowned. "What is he listening for?" Another shrugged. "I have no idea." Ethan stood and asked calmly, "Has anyone replaced any components today?" Victoria answered impatiently. "No. It broke down during the drive." "Any software updates this morning?" Her lead engineer hesitated. "There was one." Ethan nodded slightly. "And after the update, did anyone recalibrate the battery management system?" The engineer's confident expression disappeared. "How did you know there was an update?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he requested a digital multimeter and a diagnostic scanner. One assistant laughed. "As if our equipment would help him." Victoria crossed her arms. "Give it to him." The scanner was connected. Within seconds, encrypted fault codes began filling the display. The engineers smiled again. "The software is proprietary," one said. "He won't understand any of that." Ethan studied the codes quietly. His fingers tapped lightly against the scanner as he mentally translated the numerical patterns. A faint smile appeared on his face. "This isn't an engine failure." The entire group looked at him. "It's a communication conflict between the control module and the battery management system," Ethan continued. "The update forced the vehicle into a protective shutdown because one sensor is reporting impossible temperature data." Several engineers exchanged confused looks. "That's impossible," one protested. Ethan pointed toward a tiny connector hidden beneath the coolant reservoir. "It isn't impossible. That connector isn't fully seated." The lead engineer immediately bent down to inspect it. His face turned pale. The connector was indeed loose. Someone had apparently disconnected it during a software check and failed to lock it back into place. For the first time since arriving, the laughter stopped. Victoria removed her sunglasses and stared directly at Ethan. Her confident smile slowly faded. The humble mechanic she had mocked moments earlier had uncovered in less than 10 minutes what her own elite engineering team had completely overlooked. And for the first time that afternoon, she began to wonder who this quiet single father really was. The garage fell into complete silence as the lead engineer carefully pressed the loose connector into place. A sharp click echoed through the engine bay, confirming it had finally locked. He looked back at Victoria with an embarrassed expression. "He's right," he admitted quietly. The connector wasn't secured. Victoria's executives shifted uneasily. Only minutes earlier, they had laughed at Ethan. Now, no one found the situation amusing. Ethan didn't celebrate. He simply continued inspecting the vehicle. "Don't start it yet," he said calmly. The lead engineer paused with his hand hovering over the ignition button. "What now?" "The loose connector caused the shutdown," Ethan explained, "but it's probably not the only problem. If you restart the system immediately, you could damage the battery management software." One engineer frowned. "Our recovery procedure doesn't mention that." Ethan smiled politely. "Sometimes the manual isn't written for unusual situations." He connected the diagnostic scanner once more and carefully navigated through several maintenance menus. Although the interface was unfamiliar, the system's logic wasn't. Engineering principles rarely changed, even when the software did. Several fault codes disappeared. A few stubborn warnings remained. Ethan traced another wiring harness toward the cooling system. "This temperature sensor is sending impossible readings because air entered the coolant circuit." The engineers exchanged puzzled glances. "How can you tell?" "Because if the battery were actually that hot," Ethan replied, "none of us would be standing this close." A few mechanics nearby couldn't help smiling. Even Victoria fought the urge to laugh, not at Ethan this time, but at how obvious his explanation sounded. Following Ethan's instructions, the engineers carefully bled the cooling system. Small air bubbles escaped before coolant flowed smoothly again. "Now," Ethan said, stepping back, "try it." The lead engineer pressed the start button. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then the dashboard illuminated normally. The warning lights disappeared one after another. A soft electronic chime sounded through the cabin. Finally, the electric motors came alive with a smooth, quiet hum. "It's running," one assistant shouted. The entire team erupted in relieved applause. Several mechanics from the garage smiled proudly, even though none of them had touched the prototype. Victoria stared at the instrument panel in disbelief. Her engineers had spent nearly an hour arguing over complex software failures. Ethan had solved the real problem in less than 20 minutes. She slowly walked toward him. "I owe you an apology," she said. Ethan wiped his hands on the same old blue rag. "You don't owe me anything. Your vehicle needed fixing. That's all." His calm response caught her off guard. Most people would have reminded her of the cruel joke she had made. Instead, he acted as though it had never happened. At that moment, Lily walked over carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. She handed one to her father. "I knew you'd fix it," she said with a proud smile. Victoria watched the little girl beam with admiration. For the first time that day, she noticed something far more valuable than technical skill. Despite years of hardship, Ethan had raised a daughter who believed in kindness, humility, and hard work. Those qualities couldn't be bought with wealth or built through corporate success. As the helicopter approached in the distance, its blades echoing across the parking lot, Victoria looked at Ethan with entirely different eyes. The challenge she had made as a joke suddenly didn't seem quite so impossible anymore, and she couldn't shake the feeling that fate had brought her to this small garage for a reason. The sound of the helicopter grew louder until it landed in an open field beside the service station. Dust swirled through the air as Victoria's assistants hurried to gather briefcases and presentation materials. But Victoria didn't move. She stood looking at Ethan, who had already returned to cleaning his tools as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Most people would have used the moment to ask for money, a reward, or at least recognition. Ethan asked for none of those things. "How much do I owe you?" Victoria finally asked. Ethan looked toward the office where the service manager was preparing the invoice. "The standard diagnostic fee," he answered. "Nothing more." She blinked in surprise. "You just saved a multi-million-dollar prototype and my biggest investor meeting. You're seriously charging me the same price you'd charge anyone else?" Ethan nodded. "Fair is fair." Victoria smiled faintly. It was the first genuine smile anyone on her team had seen all day. Before leaving, she reached into her purse and handed Ethan a sleek black business card embossed with silver lettering. "My direct number," she said. "If you ever need anything, call me." Ethan accepted it politely but slipped it into his shirt pocket without even reading it. That simple gesture stunned Victoria more than any compliment could have. Most people chased powerful connections. Ethan treated her card like any ordinary piece of paper. As the helicopter lifted into the sky, Lily tugged gently on her father's sleeve. "Dad?" "Yes, sweetheart?" "Weren't you going to remind her about what she promised?" Ethan chuckled softly. "No. But she said she'd marry you if you fixed the engine." Several mechanics burst into laughter. Even Victoria, halfway to the helicopter, turned around with a blush and laughed at the innocent reminder. "I think your daughter has an excellent memory," she called back playfully. Lily grinned. "I remember everything." Victoria smiled at the little girl before boarding the helicopter. As it disappeared into the distance, she looked down through the window at the tiny repair shop growing smaller below. For reasons she couldn't explain, she couldn't stop thinking about the quiet mechanic who had refused to embarrass her, demand a reward, or boast about his abilities. Later that evening, the investor presentation was a tremendous success. The prototype performed flawlessly, and the company's newest project secured a record-breaking investment worth hundreds of millions of dollars. During the celebration dinner, executives congratulated Victoria on another brilliant achievement. Yet her thoughts kept drifting back to the roadside garage. She remembered Ethan's patience, his confidence, the little girl who looked at her father as though he were the greatest man alive. Meanwhile, Ethan and Lily shared a simple dinner at home: homemade soup, toasted bread, and laughter over Lily's school stories. They had no luxury, no private helicopters, and no headlines celebrating them. But they had peace. As Ethan tucked Lily into bed, she smiled sleepily. "I still think she's going to come back." He laughed. "Why would a famous CEO come back to an ordinary mechanic?" Lily hugged her teddy bear. "Because good people always find each other." Ethan kissed her forehead and switched off the light. Outside, the night was quiet. Miles away, Victoria sat alone in her penthouse office, staring at the business card holder on her desk. For the first time in years, the most important decision on her mind had nothing to do with profits or investors. It was whether she should return to the little garage, not as a CEO seeking repairs, but as a woman hoping to know the man who had quietly changed the way she saw the world.